Hey guys, tonight we are going to slip into a world of velvet gloves, polished hoods, and lethal talons. Yes, you're stepping straight into the strange, hushed realm of medieval falconers. Imagine yourself trudging up a damp castle stairwell. Falcon perched on your wrist, leather jesses looped through your gloved hand. That bird's eyes gleam with a wild brilliance. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive a single day caring for one of these feathery assassins. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, leave a comment with your location and what time it is where you are. Because I love seeing how far our little sleepy history community reaches. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slip out of the present day and into the murky centuries where falconry first took flight across Europe. It's the 5th or 6th century, though historians still argue whether the first truly trained falcons arrived with the Huns or with Roman merchants carrying exotic birds along the Silk Roads. Picture a noble's household back then. Damp rushes. On the floor, a hearth sputtering in the gloom, and perched on a polished wooden stand, a falcon, more prized than many horses, even more valuable than a knight's sword. These birds had crossed deserts, sailed strange seas, and stepped onto European soil like they owned the place. You might think medieval people had bigger problems, plagues, bandits, taxes, but the falcon's arrival changed social life in ways most folks today forget. Suddenly, you had a new creature that could hunt with lethal precision, but also demanded endless care, expensive housing, and a specialized keeper who spoke to it in gentle tones. The first European lords to get their hands on these raptors felt like they'd been handed the keys to a living, breathing weapon. Falcons could chase hares, ducks, partridges, all the game a medieval feast might require. Yet even more than food, they brought status. It was a feathered brag, a living symbol that you had money, power, and time to spare. People whispered in hallways about who owned what bird. A saker falcon from the east, a gerfalcon from the far north. It was basically medieval Instagram, showing off to everyone in your orbit. It's easy to imagine a dinner conversation around the Lord's smoky hall. Oh, you're still flying. A Merlin? How quaint. It might sound silly, but back then, it was dead serious. Monarchs swapped falcons the way modern politicians swap medals. Kings gifted each other birds wrapped in leather hoods, tied with silk, and sometimes even fitted with tiny silver bells. One documented gift included a falcon whose perch was inlaid with ivory and polished to a mirror shine. Apparently, a sultan sent it to a French king, and the whole court gasped at its delicate beauty. Historians still debate whether these imported birds really adapted to their new environment. Medieval records complain endlessly about feather rot, an infection that plagued newly arrived falcons, and about birds who refused to hunt in rainy, gloomy Europe after years in dry desert climates. These exotic guests sometimes died within weeks, devastating their new owners. Yet people kept importing them. They couldn't help it. The fashion of falconry had taken hold like a mild fever. And when something is a medieval status symbol, trust me, it's here to stay. Of course, falconry was never cheap. From its very arrival, only the well-off could afford the birds, the trainers, the mews to house them, the special food, the intricate gloves. You might as well have tried to buy a personal knight and a summer villa on the same day. Commoners had no chance unless they worked directly under a lord who allowed them to handle these regal animals. And still, once in a while, a scrappy peasant would manage to borrow a low-ranking hawk, something a local reeve kept for chasing pigeons off the grain bins. That's as close as most villagers ever got to the glamorous world of falconry, a bird who scared away pests instead of hunting pheasants. But for nobles, it was everything. You could stand on a hillside, wind tugging at your cloak, falcon, hooded and calm on your wrist, and feel like the absolute master of land and sky. It didn't matter if you ruled a crumbling little manor or a kingdom. If you had a falcon, you had prestige. There is an old poem from around the year 1000, praising a falcon's piercing eyes as the mirror of a prince's soul. You can almost see that medieval poet scribbling by candlelight, glancing up at a bird preening on its carved perch, feathers shining in the dim glow. Tonight, as you rest, imagine those first imported falcons being unloaded from creaking ships, their claws gently wrapped in linen to stop them from ripping holes in the sailors. Hear the shuffle of merchants selling them off, the eager gasps of noble buyers, the squawks of a bird realizing it has a whole new continent to conquer. You can practically smell the tar on the ship's ropes, feel the chill North Sea air on your cheeks, see the ragged sails flapping as the birds are carried down the gangplank. Even in that moment, the future of falconry was taking shape, a mingling of foreign skill, medieval ambition, and a raptor's pure, predatory instinct. And just think, this was only the beginning of the long, strange bond between these birds and their human caretakers. The same relationship that will soon demand oiling feathers, polishing silver bells, and teaching a falcon to trust you, or at least not to claw your nose off in irritation. Sleepy yet? Don't worry. There's still a great deal of falcon fluffing, feather checking, and gentle medieval nonsense to come. You ease onward, still carrying the image of those regal birds stepping off their boats as if they own the docks. And it's here, on these muddy wharves, that you start to wonder who on earth first thought, let's train this terrifying bird to do our bidding? Falconry has roots far deeper than Europe. Some of the oldest evidence of trained hunting birds appears on Persian and Assyrian reliefs going back thousands of years. You picture dusty stone carvings showing kings gripping a hooded falcon, and you realize this practice was ancient long before medieval nobles ever dreamed of velvet sleeves and feather bells. The earliest actual falconry manuals we know of come from the Arab world, describing step-by-step how to condition a falcon, how to build its trust, and even how to cure its injured talons. Historians still argue whether it was a nomadic innovation, learned on the Asian steppe as horsemen trained hawks to chase rabbits, or a royal invention that spread down from Persian courts. Either way, these birds of prey had been working with humans for centuries, their skills refined, their instincts sharpened, their patience tested. By the time falconry arrived in Europe, it carried a proud, almost holy mystique. You stand in the damp chill of a medieval courtyard, a falconer showing you how to offer your wrist at exactly the right height so the bird doesn't slam into your face. He grins, missing half his teeth, and jokes that you'll only make that mistake once, and the falcon? Its eyes fix on yours with that quiet, terrifying calm only a predator can manage. It is not your friend, at least not yet. You're an obstacle, a shape to be memorized, a potential source of food or freedom. But with enough skill and enough bribes in the form of raw meat, you can gently teach it to accept you, to ride your glove, to return when called. Earliest falconers had to work this magic from scratch, adapting desert methods to the soggy, moss-covered hills of Europe. They experimented with what food the birds preferred, how to keep their feathers from rotting in the wetter climate, and how to design perches that wouldn't poison the falcon's feet with mold. These details may sound minor, but get them wrong, and the prize falcon could die in days. One fringe tidbit from medieval letters mentions rubbing the birds with a light layer of vinegar to ward off feather mites. Historians still argue whether that did anything at all, or if it just made the birds smell like a pickled turnip. Still, the image of a burly falconer gently massaging vinegar into a fierce hunter's feathers is hard to resist, isn't it? You pause, watching the scene unfold. The courtyard echoes with low voices, stable boys brushing horses in the distance, the occasional clatter of a pot from the kitchens. A falcon on a black perch flicks its wings and shakes, loose feathers drifting to the straw-covered ground. This is where your humble beginnings as a falconer would start. In the dirt, smelling of vinegar and old meat, learning to read a raptor's every twitch and snarl. Once you got the basics down, you'd begin training. There were endless drills, starting with hopping the bird from fist to fist, then a short distance, then a longer line, always with a scrap of meat as a reward. Medieval manuals warned that one bad experience could ruin a falcon for life. A single rough pull on the jesses, a slip of the glove, and the bird might panic or turn savage, refusing to hunt at all. There's something timeless in that. An animal that will give you its cooperation, but never its love if you respect it enough. And medieval folks respected these birds in the deepest sense. They built entire careers around them. Most falconers were specialists, trained from childhood under a master. If you had a child lucky enough to be apprenticed, you could count on years of patient practice, learning how to trim feathers, how to sew leather hoods, how to calm an angry bird with a whispered chant. Some kids were barely 10 when they first wore the thick glove and held a hooded bird, their tiny hearts racing. Falconry knowledge passed down orally at first, then in painstaking treatises written in Latin and French, and finally in vernacular languages so even local landowners could try it. One old text describes in great detail how to measure a falcon's mood by the way its feathers lie against its neck. If they fluffed too high, the bird was anxious. If they flattened, you had its attention. Tonight, you might almost envy that slow, careful life. Scanning a falcon's feathers each morning, gently cooing as you brush out mites, oiling the wings, feeding bits of rabbit liver until the bird's gleaming eyes soften from suspicion to acceptance. So here you stand, imagining your own gloved hand extended, a falcon shifting its talons ever so slightly to balance on your wrist. Its claws sting through the glove, just enough to remind you that you serve at its pleasure, not the other way around. Breathe in that medieval courtyard scent, straw, wet stones, the faint whiff of vinegar. Let the chill air slip around your neck, the soft flutter of a wing catch your ear, and feel the hush that only a bird of prey can command. You might be a nobody by medieval standards, but with a falcon on your glove, you'd be halfway to nobility. And if you think you're ready to try training one, well, good luck, because even the best falconers sometimes ended up with scratches on their cheeks and an empty glove, staring at a bird that had flown straight back to the wild. You stand there, the falcon shifting its weight with the subtle power of something that does not quite belong to you. It is a strange partnership, one that will come to define medieval aristocracy in a way few other hobbies could. Because once these regal birds made their homes in European courts, they rose instantly to the highest ranks of medieval status. If you had a falcon, you were someone. And if you had the best falcon, you were everyone. Nobility measured itself by what perched on a fine leather glove almost as much as by the cut of its tunic or the number of its horses. Falconry became a badge of rank, a living standard with its own code and hierarchy. Some birds were restricted to royalty alone. Only a king could fly a gerfalcon, for example, while knights had to settle for smaller hawks. This system was so strict that breaking it could get you into real trouble. Imagine showing up at a noble gathering with the wrong bird on your arm. People might whisper behind your back, or even report you to a local lord. In some places, a peasant found in possession of a noble's falcon might have their hand cut off. Mild punishment, medieval style. But behind that stiff social theater was a gentle truth. These birds were loved, and so thoroughly pampered that you might feel a bit envious. Their hoods were stitched of velvet, sometimes embroidered with pearls. Their bells were polished bright and tuned to a pleasant, soft jingle. Their perches were wrapped in padded cloth to protect delicate toes. Historians still argue whether the expense was truly about love, or if it was simply a way to flaunt wealth. It was likely both. A falcon was precious, and treating it well protected your investment. Plus, pampering your bird showed the world that you were so rich you could even spoil a killer dot as you follow a falconer through a castle hallway. You'd hear endless little stories of birds behaving badly or birds performing marvelously. One chronicler wrote that a falcon refused to fly until its hood was decorated with a bit of gold embroidery. Who knows if that was true, but you can sense the possibility. Picture it now. The Lord's daughter, in trailing linen sleeves, delicately adjusting the golden thread on a falcon's hood while her father scolds the servants for forgetting to polish the bell. The whole household dances around this one bird as if it were the crowned heir. Outside, the hunting grounds wait. Noblemen ride out on fine horses, birds perched on their gauntlets, accompanied by an entourage of beaters, squires, cooks, and a few curious dogs. The falcons sit calm under their hoods, the hush before a storm. In that quiet moment, you might almost mistake them for harmless. But remove that hood, and you unleash a feathered missile that could kill a partridge in seconds. Falconers learn to measure status not just by the kind of bird, but by how many servants you had to support your falconing habit. A truly powerful lord might employ half a dozen falconers, a boy to clean the mews, another to cut fresh meat, a third to oil the leashes, a fourth to carve perches, a fifth to record each hunt, and a sixth to train apprentices. The pampering went beyond the bird to the whole system surrounding it. And if the bird itself fell ill, you would summon one of the rare medieval veterinarians who specialized in falcons. These specialists could charge outrageous fees for wrapping a wing, mending a damaged talon, or mixing up a potion of ground. Herbs to cure cold feather, a vaguely defined sickness that might have been anything from infection to simple stress, one of the more fringe remedies. Recorded in a 14th century manuscript, involved gently singing to a falcon while waving rosemary smoke under its beak. Historians still argue whether the bird found that soothing or just resigned itself to the weirdness of medieval medicine. Either way, you can picture a grim-faced falconer humming a lullaby while a poor, puzzled raptor twitches its beak, walking. Deeper into this castle, you see another oddity: bird baths for falcons. Fresh, shallow troughs of clean water were laid out for bathing, changed daily. Clean feathers meant healthy feathers, and healthy feathers meant a working hunter. Medieval people had no clue about microbes, but they did understand that filth led to rot. One lord even imported a rare scented soap from Moorish traders to wash his prized falcon. Let that sink in. A soap fit for a prince, reserved for a bird. You'd probably get stale bread and onion soup, but that falcon would be squeaky. Clean. This is the medieval world after all, where rank and spectacle reigned. And if pampering a predator proved your status, then no expense was too silly. So you stand there, half in awe and half amused, watching a falcon's feathers fluff to perfection while a servant polishes its silver bell to a sleepy jingle. A soft breeze sighs through the arrow slits, stirring rushes on the floor, as you realize this is just the beginning of the pampering routine that would define the life of a medieval falconer. You move along through the hallways, trailing behind the falconer as he makes his way toward the mews, that special sanctuary for his birds. Once inside, you are struck by a strange scene: falcons getting groomed as if they were royal children, pampered with a precision that would put even the grandest medieval lords to shame. Feather by feather, each bird was checked, cleaned, and smoothed. A falconer would slide his thumb gently along each shaft, testing for cracks or mites, and then stroke oil, made from a blend of herbs, animal fats, and sometimes rose water to keep the plumage glossy. The scent of rosemary and tallow is thick in the air, a surprising comfort against the dampness that so often plagued medieval stone buildings. It sounds almost silly, oiling a killer's feathers, but a falcon in perfect condition flew straighter, faster, and more beautifully. Medieval manuals even described how to comb out tangles in the fluffy down beneath the outer feathers, the way you might smooth the tangles from a child's hair. Historians still argue whether this fuss was based on solid science or just an instinct to pamper valuable animals. The falconers did not stop at feather oiling. Oh no, there were talons to check for chips and cracks, beaks to file smooth sometimes, even a tiny dab of beeswax to polish the beak until it shone. You might chuckle imagining a bird of prey with a beauty routine, but that was medieval life. If you valued the falcon's talents, you pampered it like royalty. And those who learned this craft, they had to memorize it all. Every oil blend, every tiny gesture, every subtle change in feather gloss that might hint at illness. One small slip and you could lose the trust of the bird forever. In the background, you hear the rhythmic clink of a stone being drawn over a knife, a reminder that birds were not the only things being sharpened. But even the falconers' knives were carefully managed, kept dull enough to never accidentally cut the bird while trimming jesses or leather straps. Falconers were detail-obsessed in a way that might seem absurd until you realize one mistake could cost a year's income. The mews, with their wooden perches and padded stands, felt more like a gentle nursery than a hunting stable. You watch. A young falconer's apprentice measured the height of a perch with a careful eye, adjusting the angle so a bird wouldn't strain its talons while resting. Everything was about balance and comfort, and still, you can sense the tension coiled within. Those pampered birds like a spring ready to snap. A falcon might look calm, hooded, and seemingly asleep, but remove that hood and its instincts burst forth in an instant. Claws closing, wings beating the air with incredible force. Some manuals advise speaking softly to a bird while unhooting, using a low tone to remind it of your presence. Historians still debate whether falcons understood the words or simply recognized the cadence of a calm human voice. Either way, these raptors seem to appreciate a soothing rhythm, much as you might drift off to a steady rain outside your window. You stand in that mews, breathing the earthy perfume of straw, tallow, leather, and feathers. The birds shift on their perches, bells softly chiming like a lullaby. You might even forget that these are hunters, capable of striking prey out of the sky. Over on a small wooden workbench, you see a strange tool, a miniature comb made of bone. Falconers used it to tease out knots in the softer feathers, keeping them fluffy and well-aligned for insulation and flight control. A medieval bird's spa day, essentially. Sometimes they'd sprinkle crushed lavender around the mews to keep insects away. It's a gentle smell, a touch of sweetness in a world full of sweat and hard labor. You can almost taste that lavender-scented air on your tongue, mixing with the slight tang of vinegar left from earlier cleaning. You notice that even the falconers themselves were required to stay presentable. Some lords demanded their bird handlers wear neat clothes so no ragged hems or filthy aprons would offend the noble visitors who came to admire the birds. Appearance mattered, even for a caretaker of birds. Tonight, you can imagine moving from perch to perch, checking each bird, smoothing each feather, whispering soft encouragements. You might never get the chance to fly one yourself. Remember, only nobles could do that. But tending to their beauty, health, and pride was a status of its own. In this hush, birds sleep beneath their hoods, hearts still beating strong, talons still ready to strike. You can almost hear their dreams rustling the feathers, a little tremor running through a wing, a soft click of a beak. So keep breathing with that rhythm, slow and even. Feel the calm of the mews settle into you. the gentle motions of centuries-old routines working their spell on both bird and human alike. Medieval falconers built a strange kind of bond, one part service, one part awe, one part terror. And tomorrow? They would do it all over again, from oil to lavender, from beeswax to leather, keeping those regal birds as pampered as any prince who ever lived. The world of falconry was not just about the birds themselves, but also about the little trappings that surrounded them. You follow the falconer as he gestures to a row of delicate hoods hanging from pegs on the mews wall. These were no ordinary scraps of leather. They were works of art, dyed deep crimson or soft blue, sometimes embroidered with gold thread or finished with tiny seed pearls. These falcon hoods served to calm the bird, shielding its predatory eyes from distractions until the moment came to fly. Historians still argue whether the fanciest hoods were really helpful or just another medieval flex, but you can see why they became fashionable. A perfectly fitted hood, velvet soft, with polished brass eyelets and decorative tassels, spoke volumes about the owner's wealth and status. Beside those, a row of bells waited to be tied to the bird's legs. You reach out, fingers grazing them, and they jingle softly, almost like the faint chime of a child's toy. Yet these bells were far from playthings. Each was tuned so the falconer could hear where the bird flew, a primitive tracking device. That doubled as a status symbol. The richer the lord, the more refined the bell. Some even had bells with their coat of arms etched upon them, turning a hunting trip into a subtle act of medieval branding. Then there were the jesses, those thin leather straps attached to the falcon's ankles, which were sometimes decorated with silver or even inlaid gemstones. You can practically see a lord fussing over which pair of jesses matched which hood, as if dressing a doll rather than a flesh-tearing bird of prey. One particularly curious accessory was the buet, a short leather strip that fastened the bells to the bird's leg, often perfumed with a touch of rose oil to keep insects away. Imagine that, a falcon striding through a forest, jingling delicately, with a faint trace of roses following in its wake. Only medieval Europe could have dreamt that up. The perches, too, were anything but simple. Falcons had to rest on a carefully balanced block of wood, padded with soft cloth to avoid pressure sores. Wealthy lords would commission carved perches decorated with intricate knotwork or even tiny animal faces, as if the perch itself were a sculpture worthy of display. Historians still puzzle over whether these over-the-top luxuries truly helped the falcons or were just another layer of medieval conspicuous consumption. Probably both, you think. As you stroke a braided leather leash laid out for inspection, the falconer shows you how to slip the hood on and off with the tiniest movement, making sure the feathers of the face are never ruffled. Too much fumbling, and the bird might panic, breaking its own feathers trying to get free. The quiet, precise motion feels almost sacred, a tiny ritual repeated 1,000 times in a falcon's life. Next, he picks up a whistle, beautifully turned from horn, polished until it gleams in the lamplight. This whistle was the falconer's voice across the fields, a way to call a bird home from dizzying heights. Whistle tones were carefully taught to each falcon, with subtle changes indicating when to circle, when to return, when to strike. It was a secret language shared between handler and hunter, woven through centuries of practice. Tonight, you can almost hear those whistles floating across a summer meadow, accompanied by the far-off jingle of a hunting bell. They carry in the breeze, mingling with birdsong and the rhythmic pounding of horses' hooves. And at the center of it all, the falcon, hood pulled back, eyes fixed on its target, ready to drop from the sky with breathtaking speed. These accessories weren't cheap. Some hoods cost more than a peasant earned in a year, especially if a famous artisan had sewn them. Bells, too, could cost a fortune because a poor quality bell could snap. mid-flight and leave your valuable bird untraceable in the sky. Among the stranger items a falconer might carry was a tiny ring of twisted brass, shaped like a coil, which they believed brought good luck to the bird if tied to its leash. Historians still argue if that worked, but hey, wouldn't you hedge your bets with a lucky charm if you were sending your precious falcon hundreds of feet into the air? As you rest your gaze on all these ornaments, you realize this was a world of astonishing care. Falcons didn't just get tools to survive, they got tools to live like royalty. And medieval lords surrounded them with symbols of wealth, so their neighbors would know exactly who was in charge, even if it took a velvet-hooded falcon to prove it. Tonight, let your thoughts drift across the soft jingle of a bell, the perfume of rose oil on a Buick, the delicate stitching of a velvet hood, and the steady glow of lamplight on polished horn. All these layers of finery somehow conspired to serve one simple, wild creature, and that creature, fierce and untamable, still carried in its keen eyes a reminder that no matter how pampered, it was never fully yours. The muse grows quieter as night falls, and you follow the falconer toward the feed room where the next stage of this royal pampering begins. Because if you think medieval nobles fed these birds just scraps, think again, their diet was practically fit for a king. Falcons, you see, were athletes. They needed protein-rich diets to keep their powerful flight muscles in perfect form, their talons sharp, their minds keen. So a medieval falcon's dinner menu included a rotation of quail, rabbit, pigeon, and occasionally a bit of raw beef, freshly butchered, never salted or smoked, for fear of spoiling its hunting instincts. It might sound delicious if you were a raptor, but a bit much if you were a servant on gruel duty. In fact, medieval household accounts sometimes recorded more money spent on falcon food than on feeding the kitchen staff. You can practically hear the cooks grumbling. They eat better than we do. Historians still argue whether a richer diet actually improved the birds' hunting success or simply kept their feathers glossy. What is certain is that the medieval aristocracy loved to spare no expense, and so they offered up the best. There are records of falcons being fed egg yolks beaten with fresh goat milk to maintain glossy plumage, or even a splash of wine for fortification, a custom that might horrify modern veterinarians. You stand in the flickering light of a tallow candle, watching a falconer cut chunks of rabbit meat into careful portions, removing sinew and tough skin so the bird's digestive system wouldn't get clogged. He weighs each piece in the palm of his hand. A routine performed night after night. Nearby, a young apprentice lines up small earthen bowls, each with the bird's name scratched on the side in crooked letters. It's almost charming, this medieval bird buffet. Every falcon had its own portion, its own preparation style, its own mealtime ritual. Some birds were picky, refusing to eat if the meat was too cold or if there was a hint of sourness. A falconer had to know exactly how to tempt each one. There are stories of falconers sleeping near their birds with a pouch of fresh meat tied to their belts, ready to offer a snack if the bird woke restless. You might chuckle, thinking of a medieval nobleman scolding his staff for spoiling the birds. Yet in the same breath, that nobleman might complain that a dry pigeon breast made his best falcon sulk for days. One fringe practice, noted in a 14th century treatise, even recommended feeding a falcon a sprinkle of crushed pearls in its meat to ward off disease. Historians still argue whether that was superstition or simply a clever merchant's marketing trick to sell pearls. Either way, it makes you pause. A bird with a more lavish palate than half the royal household. Your imagination drifts across the feed room, where rows of knives gleam, feathers float in the lamplight, and a faint iron scent of fresh meat hangs in the air. It's both beautiful and eerie. A place where nature's fiercest hunters submit for a moment to human hands. As you stand among the scraps and bones, you realize how fragile this relationship truly was. One spoiled piece of meat, one careless portion, and a valuable falcon might grow ill or die. Medieval people feared crop sickness, a vague illness thought to rot the bird's stomach. Modern historians suspect this was often simply food poisoning, but in the medieval mind, it was an almost supernatural curse. You look closer and see the falconer testing the meat's freshness, pressing it between thumb and finger, sniffing for even the faintest whiff of decay. That care kept the birds alive, soaring, and most importantly, bringing glory to the house. Once the meat was measured, the falconer would walk quietly among the perches, offering each bird its portion. The birds bent forward, sharp beaks, tearing with precise, brutal speed. There is something hypnotic about that motion, the hush of feathers, the faint crunch of bone. A falcon feeding is a reminder that for all their pampering, these birds remain predators. They were never pets, never fully tamed. Their wildness flickered just beneath the surface, a gleam of sharp yellow eye and an instinct honed over thousands of years. Tonight, let yourself ease into the image of the muse as it settles into darkness. The birds dozing, bellies full, feathers sleek and oiled, dreams no doubt drifting across the skies of imagined hunts. In that quiet, you can almost taste the medieval mixture of awe and fear that surrounded these creatures. The smell of raw meat fades into the night, replaced by the earthy perfume of straw and the distant thud of horse hooves beyond the castle wall. Let your breathing match that rhythm, steady and calm, because in this little corner of medieval life, even the most pampered falcon stayed a step away from wildness, and that tension somehow made them all the more magnificent. You slip back into the hush of the muse, still carrying that faint scent of fresh meat in your memory. But behind every trained falcon, of course, was a pair of human hands, often quite small, quite nervous and determined to learn the craft. These were the apprentices, the boys and girls whose lives revolved around these demanding birds. The apprentices' day began before dawn, checking perches, replacing straw, wiping down the leather jesses, and making sure every hood was perfectly fitted. If even a thread came loose, it was the apprentice who got scolded, not the falconer. You imagine a bleary-eyed teenager, fumbling with a hood's golden tassel while the birds watched with icy stares. Some of these apprentices came from noble families, hoping to learn a skill that would bring them closer to a powerful household. Others were from humble backgrounds, children of servants or farmers, offered to the muse as a chance at better work. Either way, they shared one lesson in common. A falcon demands total focus. A single slip, a hood tugged too roughly, a perch set at the wrong angle, could earn a scratch from those hooked talons that might scar for life. And believe me, falcon scratches were no medieval badge of honor. They could fester and leave you permanently disfigured. Still, you sense the fierce pride of these young handlers. Falconry was respected, even a little magical, and to learn its secrets meant you belonged to an exclusive circle. Many medieval manuals mention how apprentices were expected to memorize entire feeding charts, herbal salves for feather mites, and how to patch a damaged bell. Historians still argue whether girls were truly welcome in the muse, or if the records are biased toward boys. But there are surviving references to young women learning to handle birds, particularly in noble households where lady falconers were respected. One fascinating mention describes a lady's maid who trained a sparrowhawk so successfully that her employer raised her status. The falconer's apprentices were basically the medieval animal care interns. They ran to fetch fresh water, carried scraps from the kitchens, sewed replacement jesses in the evenings, and watched endless hours of falcons being flown. If they were lucky, they might get to hold the glove and let a bird perch for a moment, feeling the quick pulsing life of the raptor through layers of padded leather, and while they labored, they listened. A master falconer passed down knowledge through stories, warnings, and half-whispered proverbs. There was one saying, "A careless apprentice loses a bird, but a patient one gains its trust." You watch a scene now. A girl no older than 12, standing perfectly still while a merlin shifts on her wrist, testing her balance. The bird fixes her with a cold stare, then relaxes. The tiniest moment of acceptance, enough to make her heart pound with pride. Their chores could seem endless. Polishing the bell clasps, scrubbing perches with vinegar, sweeping feathers into piles, sharpening a special tool for trimming beaks, measuring out meat, all repeated day after day. But in the rhythm of that repetition was a quiet, meditative calm. Almost a medieval ASMR moment, you might say, as the apprentice found a trance in the tasks, soothed by the brushing of feathers and the soft clinking of bells. One fringe note from a medieval letter mentions an apprentice who invented a small wooden falcon puppet tied with a string to mimic a flapping motion, which he used to train a bird to strike on command. Historians still debate whether this puppet technique worked or was just the desperate invention of a terrified boy trying not to lose his master's precious bird. You step through the straw and shadows, imagining your own hands tying a tiny bell to a jess, adjusting the length so the falcon can hunt without tangling its legs. It's a delicate science. No measurements too short, no weights too heavy. These children learned it all. Sometimes, after a long day, apprentices would collapse in their straw beds right next to the muse, listening to the sleepy rustle of wings and the faint sighs of the birds settling in for the night. The sense of connection to the animals, to the rhythms of a noble house, must have been overwhelming, especially compared to a life of farming or menial labor. Tonight, as you lie in your own bed, imagine your hands still carrying the faint heat of a bird's talons, your nose filled with the scent of straw and leather. You have worked a full day, learned more about a living predator than most villagers would learn in a lifetime, and earned the right to sleep with the knowledge that tomorrow you will do it all again. Close your eyes for a moment. Feel the hush of the muse around you, the soft breathing of the other apprentices, the faint chime of a bell in the darkness. That is the rhythm of medieval falconry, patient, repetitive, but endlessly fascinating, a gentle ritual that still soothes the heart. Centuries later, you drift onward into the deeper hush of the falconer's world, where the scent of straw, leather, and damp stone hangs heavy. Tonight you notice that falconry wasn't just a masculine affair. No, women took to these regal birds with a quiet determination that changed the muse forever. Noble women, especially those of high birth, were expected to master some hunting skills, and falconry was seen as suitably refined. Unlike boar spears or bear traps, a hooded falcon on a lady's gloved hand looked elegant, graceful, and even a bit romantic. You picture a tall lady in a linen veil, gently adjusting the hood on her merlin, whispering soft encouragements before a hunt. Historians still argue whether women had as much freedom to train falcons as men, or if their birds were more ceremonial. But several medieval texts celebrate lady falconers whose birds outflew those of the best knights. The hawking fields became a place of social power for women, a rare chance to prove skill in public. You sense how much courage it must have taken. Falcons were never sweet house pets. They could strike without warning, their talons slicing through cloth, even skin, with alarming ease. Yet these women learned to read a bird's shifting mood just as carefully as any master falconer. In some noble households, entire mews were reserved for the lady of the manor and her birds. Servants tended their perches, cleaned their hoods, and arranged comfortable benches where the lady and her companions could watch the birds being trained. A gentle social ritual somewhere between tea and warfare. There are stories of ladies who trained sparrowhawks so perfectly that they could fly them over 100 yards and return. with a delicate songbird gripped gently in their claws. A medieval text praises one such lady for her soft voice and soft heart, but iron discipline, a combination that made her birds some of the best in the kingdom. Imagine the subtle thrill of standing in a silk gown, your Merlin on your wrist, eyes steady, waiting for the moment to slip off its hood. The bird tenses, the world holds its breath, and then, the flash of wings, the sudden freedom, the small cheer from gathered nobles as it strikes true. Some lady falconers even taught their birds a special whistle, distinct from the men's signals, to bring them back from the sky. It was a small rebellion, a feminine mark of control in a man's hunting world. One fringe story comes from a letter written by a merchant who claimed he sold tiny jeweled hoods to the mistress of a baron who had a collection of birds rivaling the king's. Historians still debate whether the baron's wife truly had more falcons, or if this was a bit of medieval gossip, but the story lingers, a testament to how powerful lady falconers could become. You glance around this special mews reserved for noble women, noting how each perch is polished to a shine, how the air smells of rosewater and lavender rather than plain straw. Small details perhaps, but they reveal a quiet empire of female skill and pride. Even today, reenactors who study medieval falconry often discover that women's hawking methods were sometimes gentler and more patient, focusing on subtle rewards rather than harsh corrections. These softer methods worked, and medieval chroniclers took note. Picture yourself in the crisp morning air, your breath frosting, a falcon on your wrist, a line of noble ladies behind you chatting and laughing, ready for the hunt. The horses stamp the earth in the background. The mews is alive with tiny bells ringing, wings shifting, a symphony of potential energy. You step forward, letting the falcon feel your calm, your measured heartbeat, your stillness. It shifts, tests your balance, then seems to approve. There is a bond here, one of respect rather than ownership, that feels timeless. Close your eyes for a second and imagine that moment. The hush before the flight. The slight tug of the leather jesses. The elegant gesture of slipping the hood. A rush of air, a flash of feathers, and the world seems to pause as your bird vanishes into the sky, powerful and beautiful. When you breathe in again, it is easy to sense how these lady falconers wrote their names into history, even if their stories were half forgotten by later centuries. Their confidence, their discipline, and their willingness to trust a creature with such deadly grace made them as respected, sometimes even feared, as any knight with a sword. Let your thoughts wander there for a moment. Soft linen gowns, gleaming bells, a hush of the hunting field, and the powerful bond between woman and bird. In that medieval hush, there was room for strength, elegance, and just a hint of gentle rebellion. The morning rises over a medieval castle, the first pale light catching the rooftops, and you follow the falconer again, this time toward one of the grandest parts of the falcon's daily life, its home. And these birds didn't just live anywhere. They had their own specialized lodges, called mews, and sometimes even entire towers built for them. Step into one of these falcon lodges now. You'll see rows of perches padded in velvet, wooden bars carefully spaced so that the birds wouldn't injure each other, and shallow basins for fresh water. There were hooks for hoods, racks for spare jesses, shelves for ointments, and a quiet, dim light to keep the birds from becoming agitated. Some mews were truly palatial, more refined than the homes of many villagers. A wealthy lord might commission tall stained glass windows so sunlight fell in soft patterns across the straw, making the falcons look even more regal as they perched and preened. Historians still argue whether these elaborate falcon lodges were built for practical reasons or purely to show off. After all, a visiting noble couldn't help but notice how many fine birds you kept in perfectly appointed towers, tended by a staff in fresh linen tunics. One mews near a French chateau was rumored to have heated floors, yes, heated, so that prized birds would never chill their toes on damp mornings. You can almost imagine a falcon, half asleep, stretching out on warm tiles like a pampered cat dot in colder climates. Straw bedding was refreshed daily to stop mold from creeping into feathers, while the walls were whitewashed every spring to reflect more light and chase away insects. Falconers took pride in these details, knowing how quickly disease could spread among confined birds. You might walk past rows of feeding stations, each with a small wooden plaque naming the falcon who dined there. The birds were individuals after all, each with quirks and preferences. Some refused to drink unless the water was poured from a brass jug, while others would only perch on a block covered in wool instead of linen. One fringe detail you notice in an old household ledger describes perfuming the entire mews with a blend of lavender, sage, and thyme, a medieval air freshener to keep the place pleasant for guests as much as for the birds. Historians still debate whether it helped the falcons, but the idea of sweetly scented hunting towers feels oddly comforting. These places became not just practical buildings, but gathering spots. Lords would stroll through the mews with guests, pointing out each bird's lineage as proudly as any horse breeder showing off prize stallions. Each bird might even have a heraldic mark on its bell or a painted design on its hood, so everyone knew exactly whose falcon was whose. Imagine a banquet ending with the lord and his visitors moving into the mews to admire the birds by torchlight, a soft breeze carrying the smell of herbs and straw, and the rustle of feathers as the birds shifted on their padded perches. And high above, some castles went so far as to build specialized falcon towers. These tall structures offered a view over the hunting fields, so a falconer could launch birds directly from the rooftop, saving precious time. You feel the stone of a spiral staircase beneath your feet, climbing up into one of these towers. The walls are cool and rough, and then you reach the top, where the falconer holds a bird poised at the open window. The countryside spreads out like a painting, rolling hills, small villages, forest patches shimmering in the light. This was where medieval life blurred into legend. A falcon bursting out of a high tower, slicing through the morning air with perfect precision, a symbol of power, wealth, and mastery over nature. Even today, you might envy the calm routine of the mews, sweeping straw, polishing bells, repairing hoods with the quiet company of birds who slept by day and hunted by your side at dawn. Let your breathing soften as you stand among those perches, listening to the faint scratching of talons on padded wood, the occasional click of a beak, the faintest whisper of a breeze. It's a rhythm that might lull you to sleep if you work there long enough. The peaceful repetition, the muted colors, the gentle sense of purpose. In a world where life was harsh and short for many, these birds lived like royalty. There, towers and lodges more luxurious than most humans could dream of. Rest a moment here in the mews, where the hush is nearly absolute, where the scent of herbs mingles with straw, and where, in the shadows, a falcon dozes with one bright eye half open, always ready to soar again. The quiet of the mews is replaced now by the thrill of dawn breaking across the hunting grounds. You follow the falconer outside, where a hush spreads through the hunting party, the soft snort of horses, the creak of leather saddles, and a low wind rustling the grass. Today, you'll watch the falcon at work, a living missile launched from a human wrist. The scene is carefully orchestrated, almost theatrical. Squires move ahead to flush game from the hedgerows, and beaters clap wooden sticks to scare partridges or rabbits into the open. The lord rides with a practiced calm, the falcon perched on his gloved fist, hooed still snugly over its head. You see the bird shift its talons, feeling the tremor of anticipation run through its tiny body. A hunting day in medieval times was no casual stroll. It took planning, an entire team, and strict social choreography. Falconers walked beside the nobles, whispering gentle reassurances to their birds, checking that bells were tied, jesses were free of tangles, and feathers perfectly smoothed out. At the moment the Lord decides to slip the hood, you hold your breath. The falcon's eyes blaze to life, scanning the field with lethal focus. It is as if someone has flipped a switch, waking a predator from deep. Within, the beaters startle a rabbit from its hiding place. The falconer gives a subtle signal, a slight toss of the wrist, a chuff of encouragement, and the bird launches, cutting through the morning air with breathtaking speed. It is a moment that never gets old. The silence of the falcon's flight, the effortless grace as it gains height, circles once, and then folds its wings to strike, like a dagger falling from heaven. You might think the kill was the falcon's only goal, but no. The hunt itself, the chase, was where the noble's pride truly rested. To show off a bird's perfect form, its strength, its discipline, was the real prize. Game was sometimes let go after the falcon had shown its skill, a theatrical ending. To a staged drama. Historians still argue whether medieval hunts were about food or about flexing power. Realistically, it was both. Falconry fed the manor, but it also fed egos, letting the Lord display his control over nature and the enormous wealth needed to maintain a bird like this. You stand at the Lord's shoulder now, seeing the falcon wheel. Overhead, tiny bells ringing faintly in the breeze. A rabbit darts across the field, its white tail flashing. The falcon cuts down in a silent arc, striking with a practiced fury that almost makes you wince. It pins the prey, then waits. Medieval falconers taught their birds not to gorge immediately, but to look for a reward from their handler. The falconer jogs forward, offering a fresh piece of meat in trade, gently taking back the catch while praising the bird in calm tones. In this dance of predator and human, trust is everything. One rough gesture, one loud word, and the bird might fly off, leaving months or years of training wasted. You listen to the breeze across the fields, hear the far-off voices of squires laughing, dogs barking, the creak of leather. The falconer strokes the bird's feathers, lowering the hood once more to bring it back to rest, its breathing slowing. That glittering killer's look fading to calm once again. A fringe detail emerges from an old hunting record. Some lords believed their falcon's first flight after winter determined their own luck for the year. If the falcon struck true and returned, it was a good omen. If it missed or flew away, the household feared bad fortune. Historians still debate how widespread that superstition really was, but you can sense how people might cling to signs in a world where fate felt so unpredictable. After a successful hunt, everyone gathered to admire the bird, sometimes giving it a tiny drink of warm water scented with herbs to calm its nerves. Then the falcon was hooded again, its job finished until the next day, and returned to its perch where it might preen in the afterglow of the chase. Imagine the hush settling over the hunting party as the horses turned back toward the castle. The falcon dozing against its master's glove, the faint metallic chime of its bell marking each sway of the Lord's arm. That sound, that movement, was medieval perfection. Prestige, skill, and nature tamed, all in one magnificent creature. Tonight, you might sense that hush yourself, a slowing of your own breath, a stillness, a moment of quiet power as you drift further into sleep. There is something deeply calming about this ancient dance, as if even the falcon's fierce heart could teach you to glide, to let go, and to rest. You follow the falconer back to the mews as the hunting party returns, the horses tired, the dogs panting, and the falcons content with their morning work. But the art of falconry didn't end with the flight or the hunt. It went on in the quietest, most precise of details. Because a falconer's real magic often came down to the subtle power of sound. That's where the falconer's whistle stepped in, an instrument as essential as the glove itself. Picture a curved piece of polished horn or sometimes a carved bit of bone drilled with holes to control pitch, tied to a leather thong around the falconer's neck. The whistle was how a falconer spoke across open skies. It carried meaning in its short trills, in its long warbles, and sharp-clipped notes that might command the bird to circle or to return. Each falcon learned its master's whistle like a code, a secret language built from habit, patience, and endless repetition. Historians still argue whether these whistles were standardized, or if each falconer invented his own tune. The manuals offer patterns, but many handlers would add personal flourishes. Imagine medieval bird call jazz, if you like, because the falcons had to know the exact signature of their own handler. There was another layer of subtlety, the falconer's voice itself. The whistle got the bird's attention, but the voice, calm and even, gave reassurance. Medieval guides recommended a soft, low tone, like a night wind. One old text put it, so the bird would not panic. You stand there in the soft straw, hearing the falconer blow a gentle note, then murmur something under his breath, a praise or command. The bird twitches, flicks its tail, then settles, understanding perfectly. That is centuries of trust, condensed into a single, quiet moment. One fringe note from an old treatise describes falconers who learned to click their tongues in specific patterns, a backup signal if the whistle was lost or broken. Historians still debate if that worked well or was just another medieval myth, but it adds to the sense of almost magical skill. If you listen closely, you might hear a falconer's whistle echo through the hunting fields, fading into the hush of woods and meadows, a sleepy lullaby woven from centuries of practice. It was not just functional either. Falconer whistles were prized gifts, beautifully carved, often engraved with a family crest or motto. A lord might present a master falconer with a gold-banded whistle, a symbol of trust and respect. These tools could be passed down through generations, the same patterns of sound teaching new birds how to trust new handlers. Imagine for a moment you are handed such a whistle, warm from a falconer's pocket, its polished horn as smooth as a river stone. You lift it to your lips, try a soft note, and feel centuries of knowledge flow through you. You watch the falconer tie the whistle to his belt again, a calm ritual after every hunt. The bird is already dozing, head tucked, feathers still ruffled from the wind, while the whistle rests within easy reach, ready for the next adventure. These quiet signals are what kept the entire art of falconry from dissolving into chaos. Without them, a falcon might vanish into the blue sky forever. But with them, a fragile bridge formed between predator and human. A reminder that cooperation was possible if you could learn to speak in notes and whispers. Let that image settle. Over you, a wide field under a mild sun, a single falcon cutting arcs through the air, and one steady voice calling it home. A voice so soft you could almost mistake it for a dream. As you breathe in that peaceful rhythm, let your own thoughts fly for a moment, then gently call them back, the way a medieval falconer would call his bird, with respect, with trust. With a steady hand. In this moment, you realize that to be a falconer was to live in harmony with wildness, balancing on a tightrope of patience and skill, guided only by a whistle, a voice, and a quiet, ancient hope that the bird would choose to return. After the calm returns to the muse, you begin to sense a sharper, more dangerous edge hiding just beyond the velvet hoods and polished bells. Because falcons, you see, were not just prizes to show off, they were political assets and sometimes even sparks of conflict. In the medieval world, falcons were valuable enough to steal, and their theft could set off full-blown rivalries. Nobles guarded their birds jealously, and falcon poaching was as real and risky as horse theft. There were entire codes of law describing what happened if someone took another lord's falcon. In many places, it was treated almost like treason. You picture it now. A falconer creeping through the half-lit mews of a rival house, trying to lift a prized bird, carefully hooded and silent. The stakes were enormous. A stolen falcon could be retrained to fly to a new handler, provided you knew how to feed it, calm it, and retrain its signals. That made the bird a weapon you could turn against your enemy's pride. Historians still argue how widespread falcon stealing really was, but enough cases appear in dusty records to convince us it happened more than once. These birds were valuable enough to tempt even trusted servants into betrayal. It wasn't just nobles who played this dangerous game. Outlaws and desperate peasants sometimes tried their luck, believing they could ransom a falcon back to its owner for a handsome reward. But handling a trained bird was no easy task. More than one would-be thief had his hands shredded by talons before he ever made it out the door. In some areas, entire teams of guards protected the mews. You can imagine the late-night watch, pacing among the straw-scented shadows, lantern in hand, ears pricked for any sound of someone tampering with the purchase. A fringe tale in one old manuscript even suggests a falconer trained a second decoy bird, a less skilled, less valuable bird that looked nearly identical, to fool thieves into taking the wrong prize. Historians still debate whether that clever trick was ever widely used or just a good fireside story, but you have to admire the ingenuity. Beyond theft, there were rivalries between lords that flared up over falconry contests. Nobles would hold informal tournaments to show whose bird could fly higher, stoop faster, or strike more cleanly. Betting huge sums on these matches was common, and you can sense how quickly a lost wager could sour into an angry feud. 13th century account describes a duel between two barons who quarreled after one accused the other of cheating by plucking the rival's falcon, that is, secretly trimming its wing feathers to sabotage its performance. That little slice of dirty sportsmanship still echoes across the centuries, and yet, through all these rivalries and risks, falconers stayed loyal to their birds, sometimes even defending them to the death. Because a falcon was more than an animal. It was a living symbol of a lord's power and dignity. You pause now, imagining the hush of the mews as a falconer locks up for the night, double-checking each hood, each bell, each latch on the door. The lantern's glow catches the burnished brass of a whistle, and a faint smell of lavender still drifts through the straw. In that quiet, you sense how tense it could be, knowing someone might break in, knowing your entire future could rest on keeping those precious birds safe. As you breathe in the safety of your own room tonight, remember how fragile this medieval pride could be. A falcon was a feathered trophy, but also a potential scandal waiting to happen. And when falconers told their apprentices to watch the birds closely, they meant very closely, because one missing bird might set off a chain of revenge no one could. Stop. Close your eyes for a moment, listening for a faint flutter of wings, the creak of a door, the distant hush of a horse shifting in its stall. That was the world a falconer slept in, always half awake, guarding a living treasure more precious than gold. Let that tension fade as you rest, knowing tonight no thief will sneak in, no rival will trim your bird's wings, no one will steal away your pride. Just you, the soft beat of a falcon's heart, and the deep, contented breathing of a muse finally at peace. You settle back among the straw and feathers, the echoes of rivalry and theft still fading, when another surprising chapter unfolds, falconry in the most unexpected place of all, the monastery. Yes, believe it or not, monks took to falconry. 2. In medieval Europe, many religious communities were granted hunting rights, and falcons were a perfect match for monastic life. Quieter than dogs, tidier than boar spears, these birds fit into the disciplined, rhythmic days of monastic routine surprisingly well. You picture a monk in a coarse wool robe, sandals crunching the gravel path, a hooded bird perched serenely on his wrist. Somehow, the calm discipline of monastic training meshed beautifully with the discipline of working with a falcon. Both required patience, quiet observation, and a steady hand. Historians still argue whether monks flew these birds, primarily for food or for trade and prestige. Some abbeys trained falcons to supplement their meat supplies, hunting game to feed their brethren. Others loaned out skilled falconers to nobles for a fee, building church wealth on feathered wings. Records mention entire monastic mews where monks raised and trained hawks and falcons, sometimes even selling the birds to finance church repairs. There is a faint humor in imagining a medieval fundraiser where the grand prize was a highly trained peregrine. As if you were raffling off a sports car today. But the spiritual side was real too. Falcons were seen as creatures of divine balance. Powerful yet graceful, fierce yet disciplined. To many monks, they symbolized the battle between the flesh and the spirit, soaring high but returning to the handler in obedience. That symbolism crept into sermons and illuminated manuscripts alike, where you can spot tiny painted falcons alongside holy texts. One fringe note comes from a 12th century sermon describing how the falcon stoop, that lightning dive to catch its prey, was like a soul returning to God in perfect trust. Historians still debate whether the metaphor caught on widely, but it is hard to resist the poetry of a step with me now into a cloister garden, where herbs grow in neat rows and bees hum lazily in the sunshine. A monk stands in the shade, carefully, brushing the feathers of a merlin, humming a psalm under his breath. The bird dozes, calm and secure, while beyond the garden walls the world worries and wars. Inside the monastery, falconry became a quiet brotherhood of its own. Apprentices learned side by side with novices, studying texts not just on scripture but on feeding regimens, feather care, and flight drills. Some monasteries even kept extensive manuals, their leather bindings worn smooth by decades of careful hands. Imagine an abbey where you might smell incense in one hallway, then turn a corner and smell raw rabbit meat in the mews. A strange collision of holy and earthly concerns. Of course, not everyone approved. Some stricter orders frowned on falconry, seeing it as a distraction from prayer. Debates flared within the church about whether training a raptor was a sin or simply good stewardship of God's creatures. One abbot's letter survives, scolding a younger monk for spending more time on the mews than at matins, suggesting that even medieval monks could get a bit carried away. Yet you can sense why they love these birds. In a world where even monasteries had to defend themselves and manage land, a hunting falcon was a practical blessing and a gentle pleasure. Let yourself rest in that image for a moment, cloisters echoing with Gregorian chant. And beyond the arches, a falcon perched in quiet dignity, waiting for the next hunt. Breathe in the stillness of that ancient place, where feathers and folded hands existed side by side. You might feel a small sense of peace knowing that even monks, with all their strict routines, found beauty and wonder in the partnership between a human heart and a predator's spirit. The quiet of the cloisters fades as your journey drifts outward once more, following a trail of politics and pageantry. Because falcons were not only for hunting or even for religious meditation, they were also prized gifts, tokens of power, that crossed entire continents. In medieval diplomacy, there was hardly a better present than a trained falcon. Imagine a royal envoy arriving at a distant court, leading a horse bearing a velvet-wrapped falcon hooded in gold thread embroidery. Such a bird announced wealth, skill, and generosity all at once. Falcons traveled from Persia to France, from Iceland to the Ottoman courts, carried over dangerous roads and stormy seas. These creatures were so valuable that entire treaties were sweetened by their delivery. A king might accept peace on condition of receiving 3 rare gerfalcons, each worth more than a knight's annual income. Historians still argue whether the falcon's appeal was about its hunting ability or its symbolism of command and prestige. Either way, these birds flew across borders as living ambassadors, carrying the scent of foreign lands on their feathers. One fringe story appears in an Icelandic saga where a Norse chieftain tried to deliver a white gerfalcon to a Byzantine emperor. The journey was so dangerous that it took more than a year, and the bird arrived half-starved but still alive, and was welcomed with such honor that the chieftain gained titles and riches beyond imagining. You stand now in a medieval hall, tapestries rippling in the breeze, watching as a falcon is presented to a visiting lord. Courtiers lean in to admire its plumage, whispering about its lineage and skills. The bird shifts under its hood, calm but ready to explode into deadly grace. At a moment's notice, the falconer steps forward, describing how the bird was trained, what it eats, how it flies. The audience is enchanted. After all, this is no common gift. It is a symbol of trust and a promise of continued friendship, carried on wings. You can imagine the gift exchange, a delicate, carefully worded ceremony with the falcon placed on a silk pillow, bells softly chiming, while the receiving noble thanks his host with polished phrases. There might even be an exchange of jeweled hoods or rare perfumes to accompany the bird. In this moment, falconry becomes more than sport or trade. It transforms into a language of politics. Kings who lacked certain prized falcons might be considered weak, their stables incomplete, their status under question. These birds quite literally made or broke reputations. There are records of entire breeding programs devoted to raising falcons suitable for diplomatic gifts. In places like Iceland and Greenland, gerfalcons were captured and carefully kept alive in harsh climates, then shipped off to royal courts as precious as any diamond. Let yourself rest in that image. A ship rolling on gray waves, a crew huddled against the cold, while below deck a prized falcon waits patiently in a padded crate, its feathers smoothed, its jesses tied with a delicate silk cord. Historians still debate how many of these birds survived such brutal journeys. But enough did that Europe's courts came to rely on these gifts, expecting them every treaty season like clockwork. Tonight, picture yourself as a young squire gently carrying a falcon across the sea, tasked with its care day and night. You? Feed it tidbits, soothe it through storms, guard it against curious rats. It becomes your constant companion, as if this creature, this living jewel, had become part of your own story. And when you finally deliver it, the look on the Lord's face tells you everything. You have brought more than a bird. You have brought status, promise, and the power to shape an alliance. Breathe in the hush of that medieval hall, the shimmer of torches on golden bells, and let yourself float there for a while, where feathers carried more meaning than any parchment treaty ever could. You leave the echo of courtly exchanges behind and follow the falconer once more, this time into the hush of winter. Because as harsh winds swept across medieval Europe, even the finest falcons needed special care to survive until the next hunting season. Cold weather was no friend to a feathered hunter. Frost could crack delicate talons, dampness could rot feathers, and sudden chills could kill a prized bird in a single night. So falconers developed elaborate winter routines to keep their royal predators safe and cozy. Imagine a stone-walled mews transformed into a winter retreat, its floors piled high with fresh straw, braziers glowing softly to warm the air. Perches were wrapped in thick wool, bells removed so they wouldn't freeze to the birds' legs, and hoods were lined with fur to hold in heat. Some noble households went even further, draping heavy woolen curtains across the mews entrances. keeping out drafts and giving the falcons a snug, quiet place to rest. The hush inside was almost a blessing. You might hear only the soft rustle of feathers, the occasional sleepy click of a beak, and the faint hiss of embers from the fire. One fringe method described in a 14th century notebook even suggests tucking warm bricks near a falcon's perch so it could rest its toes. Historians still argue if that really worked or was just medieval wishful thinking, but the idea is surprisingly sweet. You step through the warm, dim glow of this winter mews, seeing each bird fluffed up against the cold, its sharp eyes half-lidded, in drowsy calm. Their hunting might be paused, but the bond with the falconer went on, maintained by gentle grooming and quiet conversations. Falconers took this season to repair equipment, too. They re-dyed fading hoods, retied worn jesses, polished bells so they'd be ready to ring proudly when spring hunts returned. Even the whistles were checked, carved, or mended, their gentle notes practiced on sleepy birds to keep the connection strong. Imagine a falconer at a wooden workbench by candlelight, stitching a velvet hood, stopping now and then to sip warm, spiced wine, glancing over at the birds resting on padded perches. There was a kind of peace in that winter rhythm, a slower pace after the fierce rush of autumn hunts. Falcons were sometimes given a lighter diet in winter, just enough to keep them healthy without stirring their hunting instincts too soon. A well-fed falcon might grow lazy, refusing to fly at all when spring returned. So the medieval caretakers walked a fine line, enough nourishment for survival, but not so much that the birds lost their edge. You sense how fragile their condition was, balanced perfectly between comfort and wildness. Too much pampering, and a falcon might turn soft. Too little, and it might sicken or die as snow piled outside the castle walls. Falconers would slip through drifts to check on their birds, brushing ice from the mews door, listening carefully for any cough or wheeze. In the hush, the birds depended on their human partners completely during these cold months, trusting them to keep away frostbite, illness, and boredom. Picture yourself there, moving from perch to perch in the candlelit dark, checking each bird's hood, giving a reassuring stroke to its breast feathers, whispering softly so it knows you are there. Your breath puffs in the cold, mingling with the faint warmth from the braziers, and the birds shift gently in response. One medieval poem describes winter mews as the warm heart of a cold kingdom, and standing here, you can believe it. While the world outside battled snow and storms, this tiny haven glowed with gentle light, protecting some of the most precious lives in the realm. Rest a while in that glow, hearing the soft creak of wood as a falcon adjusts its feet, the muted rustle of straw under your boots, the faint clink of tools on a workbench. All of it forms a lullaby for a sleeping castle, and for you, if you let your mind drift gently toward dreams. As winter thaws and spring approaches, you sense a fresh excitement in the mews. The falcons rouse from their sleepy winter calm, feathers gleaming under the returning sun, eyes sharp and restless. And it's here that you discover another layer to their story, the way these birds fluttered straight into medieval folklore. Falcons, with their fierce grace and breathtaking speed, became symbols woven into songs, legends, and fireside tales. They were seen as creatures of nobility, power, and even prophecy. A lord who dreamed of a falcon, they said, might soon rise in rank or win a great battle. Some stories claimed falcons could see into the souls of men, refusing to fly for an unworthy master. You picture a medieval audience hushed around a smoky hearth, hearing how a knight once lost his entire fortune because a falcon would not hunt for him. A subtle sign. They believed that his heart was untrue. Historians still argue how much these folk beliefs shaped daily falconry practices. Was it just a pretty superstition, or did even hardened falconers quietly test their birds before trusting them on important hunts? The line between practicality and magic was always thin in medieval minds. One fringe tale comes from a 13th century village chronicle describing a ghost falcon, an enormous white bird said to appear on moonless nights to guide lost travelers. Was it real? Probably not, but the villagers insisted they had seen its shining wings through the trees. Falcons also perched in royal heraldry, showing up on banners, shields, and even rings worn as family crests. A falcon with wings spread meant courage and victory. A falcon hooded meant patience and discipline. These tiny details carried messages in an age when most people could not read. You might spot a carved falcon above a castle gate, reminding visitors that this house was strong, swift, and refined. Or see a lady wearing a silver pendant shaped like a falcon, a subtle message about her family's hunting skill and status. In poems, falcons became metaphors for loyalty and love. One troubadour wrote of a lady whose heart soared like a falcon, loyal yet fierce, returning only to the one who trained it best. You smile at that, knowing how medieval poets liked to blend romance with hunting imagery. Picture a spring feast, a bard strumming a lute by candlelight, telling a story about a falcon who refused to betray its master even when stolen by an enemy. The crowd leans forward, drawn to that symbol of devotion and power, letting their imaginations fill in the gaps. The birds themselves became living legends. Certain falcons were famous in their own right, their names carried from manor to manor. Like celebrity gossip, one tale tells of a gerfalcon so skilled that entire villages gathered to watch it hunt. Its dives faster than any arrow, its return so sure that no one doubted its loyalty. You stand there now, hearing echoes of those tales swirl through the mews as handlers begin spring training. The birds sense the change, wings twitching, eyes focused, hunger returning in a flash of bright intent. There is something thrilling about that moment, when a hood slips off after months of calm, and a falcon suddenly remembers what it was born to do. You can almost feel the electricity crackle in the air, the hush before it takes to the sky once more. Let your mind wander in that spring breeze, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and new grass. The bells chime softly as falcons shift, waiting. These birds, so carefully pampered, still hold the wildness inside them, a streak of fierce power no muse can fully tame. Close your eyes and breathe that in, the rebirth of the hunt, the return of songs and stories, the sense that somewhere in the flurry of feathers, legend might come alive again. As the falcons test their wings in the fresh air of spring, you begin to sense the tide of change that would one day dim their place in daily medieval life. Falconry, after all, was tied tightly to a world of rigid ranks and feudal power. And as that world changed, so too did the place of these regal birds. By the 16th and 17th centuries, new hunting weapons were on the rise. Firearms, for all their clumsy, smoky noise, began to outmatch even the keenest falcon. A well-aimed shot was cheaper, easier to teach, and required no patient years of training. Slowly, the nobles who had once flexed their prestige through a bird on the wrist found themselves reaching for a musket instead. Yet the old traditions did not die instantly. Many lords kept falconry as a symbol of heritage, a way to remember their ancestors, a kind of living ritual even if it was no longer practical. Royal families passed down prized falcons in family ledgers like heirlooms, listing their achievements alongside lists of lands and treasures. Historians still argue whether these late falconers truly flew their birds much, or simply admired them. In the mews as a mark of nobility, there is a gentle sadness to that, imagining these once mighty hunters growing fat on winter diets, their bells jingling softly though they no longer chased live prey. To protect what was left of this fading tradition, medieval and early modern lawmakers drew up strict regulations. Only certain ranks could own specific falcons. Fines for harming a bird grew harsher, and poaching a noble's falcon remained a dangerous gamble. You step through one of these legal codes now, it's neat Latin script describing the punishments for stealing or injuring a falcon, sometimes greater fines than for attacking a man. It was a sign of how valuable these birds stayed, even as their hunting purpose waned. One fringe note from a dusty court record describes a falconer being fined not for losing a bird, but for allowing it to grow idle, which suggests that, at least in the eyes of some lords, laziness was an insult to the bird's dignity. Historians still debate if such fines were truly enforced, but it paints a vivid picture. You look out across the springtime mews once more, seeing the birds in their carefully arranged perches, the sun catching their glossy feathers, their sharp eyes searching the sky. They are part of a world shifting around them. Castles being remodeled with gunpowder in mind, fields being planted for export crops instead of feasts, and the slow drip of modernity washing away old traditions. But here and there, a falcon still soars. Its flight remains a thread to the past, a living echo of an age when skill, patience, and gentle mastery meant everything. Imagine a young squire, caught between eras, learning to shoot a musket in the morning, then slipping away after dinner to brush a falcon's feathers in the evening. Torn between two worlds, he might feel how fragile tradition had become. Let that thought settle in your mind. A falcon perched quietly, its wings folded as the world moved on without it. There is a bittersweet peace in that image, a reminder that even the grandest arts can slip away when their time is done. Breathe in the calm of this final spring, the cool breeze, the faint jingle of a bell, the knowledge that these birds will always carry a memory of a world where patience, craft, and beauty still reigned, and let your own breathing match that rhythm. Slow and steady, honoring the falcon's flight even as its hunting days began to fade. You walk deeper into the mews, where time itself seems to gather dust, and your eyes catch the oddest collection of tools. These were the lesser-known, sometimes downright peculiar instruments of medieval falconry, the ones that rarely made it into paintings or epic poems, but quietly kept the whole system running. First, there was the feather iron, a tiny heated blade used to straighten bent flight feathers, restoring a falcon's aerodynamics after a rough hunt. Falconers had to master the precise heat, never scorching the delicate barbs. You can practically smell the faint singe of keratin if the iron got too hot. Then came the imping needle, a slim metal pin used to repair broken feathers by splicing in a new piece from a donor feather. If you're picturing medieval bird surgery, you're not wrong. Historians still argue whether this was a local innovation or imported knowledge, but falconers swore by it, saving many birds from retirement thanks to a skilled bit of feather transplant. You also find tiny bone-handled awls for sewing leather hoods, beeswax for waterproofing jesses, and curved knives to trim beaks. Each tool had its own name and a ritual attached to its use. The care they demanded was almost devotional. You sense how the falconer's pride was wrapped up in every stitch and polished out. One fringe device shows up in a 14th century manuscript, described as a feather fluffer, a soft brush of woven horsehair used to groom the underdown and lift out mites. The text boasts that birds cleaned this way had minds more calm for the hunt, though historians still debate whether a medieval bird could really sense a fluffy spa day. You stand beside a wooden workbench, breathing in the smell of oil and leather, seeing the tools laid out like a doctor's kit for feathered nobility. The falconer's fingers move with a quiet grace, rehearsing repairs in the off-season, preparing for the moment a prized bird might break a feather or crack a beak in mid-flight. Beyond the tools, you also see a rack of tiny weights, calibration, tools to measure exactly how much a falcon should weigh before a hunt. A bird too heavy might ignore the lure, a bird too light could grow weak. Medieval falconers tracked weight with the precision of a modern athlete's trainer. adjusting each scrap of meat until the bird was in perfect hunting form. Some even recorded a falcon's mood in small journals, noting which days it seemed more aggressive, which days it ignored commands. These falcon diaries might seem funny now, but they read like tiny windows into the living partnership between human and bird. You pick up one of these notebooks, yellowed pages covered in cramped writing. It lists feedings, training flights, small worries about the weather, even prayers for a safe return after a long hunt. In those fragile lines, you glimpse a falconer's whole heart, poured into a creature that might never fully belong to him. Let that settle over you. The humble tools, the soft brushes, the careful weighing, the quiet scrawls in a diary no one was meant to read. It feels achingly human. The patience, the hope, the love hidden under layers of medieval protocol. Historians still puzzle over how much these odd tools really mattered in the grand scheme, but you sense that to the falconer. They were everything. They gave him confidence, control, and a measure of peace in a chaotic, dangerous world. As you stand in that workshop, lit by a guttering tallow candle, listen to the soft night noises. A falcon shifting its feet, a bell ringing in the breeze, the brush of straw under boot. Breathe in that sense of gentle routine, the thousand small acts that kept falconry alive. And let your own mind rest on that comfort. The knowledge that even the simplest tools can become part of a legacy, passed down across centuries, from one quiet, careful pair of hands to the next. As you step away from the quiet workshop, your mind drifts toward a modern echo of these medieval days. Because falconry, incredibly, never quite died. Even today, in fields and festivals around the world, you can see people reviving this ancient art with a blend of fierce pride and gentle wonder. Modern falconers often study old treatises, rebuilding techniques from pages written in fading ink. They gather in reenactment fairs, in medieval tournaments, even in quiet countryside clubs, wearing padded gloves and tying jesses in the same careful knots their ancestors used centuries ago. You watch a reenactor slip a velvet hood over a peregrine's eyes, explaining to a fascinated crowd how to polish a bell, how to weigh a bird, how to shape a whistle's note. The language is older than any textbook, passed from person to person through gestures, practice, and trust. Historians still argue whether today's falconry is truly medieval or something altogether new. After all, modern medicine and travel mean birds can be imported safely, vaccinated, and trained with methods unimagined in the 14th century. Yet the spirit, the ritual, the hush, the partnership remains remarkably familiar. One fringe group even claims to follow a code drawn from the medieval book of St. Albans, right down to which rank may fly which bird. They know it's not law anymore, but for them, honoring that tradition feels like stepping back into a living past. You stand among these modern falconers, hearing their stories. A retired teacher who flies a Harris's hawk on weekend hunts. A teenager who fell in love with merlins after seeing them at a Renaissance fair. A craftsman who makes hoods embroidered with gold thread purely for the joy of it. Falconry today is smaller, gentler, but no less powerful. The moment a modern handler slips the hood from a bird's head, there is still that heartbeat of quiet tension, that trust balanced on a blade. That question, will the bird return? Imagine standing in an open field at dawn, a light breeze lifting the feathers on your bird's back. The world feels ageless, all the centuries seem to blend together, and you realize that moment could belong to a medieval baron, to a monk, or to you right now. The falcon launches, wings catching the sunlight, bells ringing softly, cutting through the morning air with a speed that defies any clock. You might feel your own pulse lift, your breath catch, as you follow its flight, because you too are linked to something older than any kingdom. Modern falconers train with telemetry, tiny radios on a bird's leg, in case it strays, but even that doesn't replace the whistle and the soft voice. That timeless call, learned across centuries, is still the heart of the bond. If you visit a falconry meet today, you'll see modern gear next to medieval patterns. Kevlar hoods beside velvet ones, steel perches beside wooden blocks, but the same quiet rituals flow through each handler's hands. Let that sink in. A chain of tradition, unbroken, still alive after 1,000 years. Each new falconer picks up where someone long dead left off, trusting a bird, teaching it, learning from it, whispering, "Come home." Breathe with that rhythm tonight, the hush of a gathering crowd, the rustle of feathers, the sound of bells. In a calm breeze, feel how those echoes stretch backward, linking you to every falconer who ever stood in that field, heart in their throat, eyes on the sky, waiting for the return. The story carries you gently toward its close, feather by feather, bell by bell, until you find yourself returning to a simple truth. Falcons still live in our dreams. Long after castles crumbled and gunpowder roared across battlefields, the falcon's image stayed etched in memory. On coats of arms and fairy tales, carved into stone arches, woven into family crests, these birds of prey lived on. Reminders of a time when a single wild heart could bind together courage, skill, and nobility. Some say we still carry a bit of that medieval longing in us, the desire to touch something fierce, to call it back with only a soft whistle and a promise. You can sense it in modern falconers, in bedtime stories, in paintings and games that still feature a falcon's flight. That ancient echo never quite faded. There is a strange comfort in it. You might have never balanced a falcon on your wrist, never mended a cracked feather or oiled a jess, but you can still understand the hush of that moment. The hood lifted, the flash of wings, the sky conquered in a heartbeat. Historians still argue what made falconry so irresistible for so long. Was it status? The thrill of the hunt? The bond of trust? Perhaps it was all of these, or perhaps it was simply the human wish to master something wild without breaking its spirit. One fringe theory suggests falconry endures in stories because it feels like a dance, a choreography of grace and power. Choreographed not through force, but through deep respect. You might nod at that, picturing a falcon wheeling over a green field, free yet faithful, proud yet gentle. Tonight, picture the muse quiet again, the hoods drawn over the bird's keen eyes, the leather straps coiled neatly, the air rich with straw, herbs, and a lingering hint of candle smoke. The falconers rest, their whistles hung on pegs, their hands scarred but steady. Outside, the world softens into dusk, and the echoes of bells fade with the evening breeze. You stand in the doorway, looking back one last time at the rows of feathered hunters, each dozing, each dreaming perhaps of endless skies. Feel that hush in your own chest now. Let your breathing mirror the calm rhythm of those birds asleep, your pulse steady, your thoughts light as feathers. There is no need to chase anything tonight. Just drift gently on currents of ancient stories. And if you listen closely, you might still hear the faint whisper of wings, gliding across centuries, reminding you that even in dreams, something noble and wild can find its way home. Now, as your breathing slows, let the images settle. The muse grow dimmer, the faint light of a candle guttering softly. You stand in the calm stillness, as if centuries of careful hands, whispered calls, and patient training have folded around you like a warm blanket. The falcons rest on their padded perches, their powerful wings tucked in, their sharp eyes hidden behind velvet hoods. They are at peace, and so are you. Outside the walls, the night is gentle, carrying a hush of spring air scented with earth and green leaves. The echoes of bells and soft whistles fade, replaced by a quiet lull, as if the world itself has chosen to rest with you. Feel your muscles loosen, your mind unspool from its day just as the falcon's leash is unknotted after a lone hunt. There is no rush, no harshness, only the easy, measured rhythm of a medieval night. Listen for the steady breath of straw beneath your feet, the distant rustle of feathers, the soothing hush of wind slipping past a castle wall. Your thoughts drift like a bird gliding on a current, light and effortless, circling once, twice, then gently coming to roost. The stories you have heard tonight of falconers, apprentices, noblewomen, monks, and their feathered companions weave together into a calm tapestry, ready to cradle you in sleep. And so, let your mind soften, let the gentle weight of history hold you. Close your eyes, knowing you are safe, and allow yourself to sink into quiet dreams, where the noble flight of a falcon still soars across the night sky, strong, free, and finally at rest.